Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week I'm going to talk a little bit about painting in a loose style. So specifically I'm going to talk about landscape painting because that's kind of the thing I do. But these ideas may be applicable to other subject matter as well. I'm not sure. So a loose painting style, maybe a good place to start is, what does it actually mean? And this is where it all starts to fall apart, because different people have different definitions, sometimes radically different definitions for what a loose painting style is. Some people see it as just an unsophisticated, sort of amateurish way of painting. You just throw the paint on and see what happens. It's all a bit slapdash and careless and all the rest of it. I've even seen people say that if you want to learn to paint in a loose style, you should use your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, pick up the brush with your left hand and try painting that way. All these ideas. Close your eyes. I don't know. Put a bag over your head or something. These are all ways of thinking about loose painting style. I think they're a bit silly, but I think loose painting style is there's a lot more to it. It's deeper than just being messy. So on screen you can see an example of what I would call a loose painting style. This is done in watercolor. What are the sort of main features about this painting that to me make it stand out as an example of a loose painting style? Well, first of all, there's really a lack of detail. There's very little detail in this painting. There's mainly just big shapes. So that would be the first thing I would say. Focus on big shapes, not little details. Another thing is the use of color. In more realistic forms of art, color is not, you don't have any freedom as the artist with color, because in a naturalistic or realistic style of painting, your whole goal is to illustrate the world as you see it. So you kind of have to use the colors that you can see in the real world. You can't just make stuff up. Whereas in a loose style, I think you can just make stuff up if you want to. There's a lot more freedom as the artist, a lot more room for maneuver. Maybe one way of getting at a definition of a loose style is to look at something that is definitely not a loose style of painting. So this is an example of photorealism. So if you type photorealism into Google and you go to the Wikipedia page, you'll see this painting. What makes this not a loose style, if you like, is the amount of detail. The huge amount of detail. Even tiniest little things are in there. So as I said, that's, if you want a basic working definition of what a loose style is, it's all about details. The less detail you have, the looser the style. That's a basic definition, but I think it's a decent working definition of what a loose painting style is. But I think there's more to it than that. If we think of art as a kind of language, a way of communicating, so the artist communicating with the viewer, in this style, in photorealism, hyperrealism, naturalism, just basic realism, all those different isms, the artist is really focusing on the details. So this communication is actually more of a one-way street. It's a one-way communication. The artist is giving the viewer so much information, so much detail, that there really isn't any room for the viewer to interpret things or to question things or to use their imagination. It's basically what you see is what you get. However, in a loose style where you're holding back on a lot of the details and you're focusing just on big shapes, there is a little bit more room for the viewer to interpret things, to fill in the blanks, to use their imagination a little bit. So the loose painting style can still be representational. You can still look at it and say, yes, this is a landscape. It's just there isn't as much detail. So it's less of a one-way street. There's a bit of, the viewer can add a bit in, if you like. It's more of a two-way street on this one. So for example, on screen we have three paintings or drawings. So on the left, that photorealism painting. In the middle, what I call semi-abstract painting. It's still representational. I think most people would look at it and say it's a landscape painting, but it's obvious that the amount of detail in it is very, very limited compared to the painting on the left, the photorealist painting. And then you can go even further. On the right is a little charcoal sketch, and let's call this a minimalist sketch. And you could argue this is not even a landscape, it's just a charcoal mark on a piece of paper, but some people will see it as a landscape. So you've reduced the detail down so much that there is a lot of room for interpretation. And the communication in that respect is much more, the emphasis is maybe now on the viewer to decide what it is that they're looking at. So that's one way of looking at loose painting style. It's not just about being sloppy or slapdash, or it's more about the amount of detail. And if you think of it as communication, is it a one-way street like photorealism, or are you going for more of a balanced approach like the semi-abstract, where it's still representational art? You're still painting a landscape and it's still obvious, I think, that it's a landscape, but now there are some gaps in there and the viewer can interpret things a little bit more. So it's a slightly more two-way street on that one. Or you can go to a more extreme, the minimalist, just have a line or a mark on a piece of paper, and really then it's up to the viewer to decide what it is that they're looking at. Is it even still representational art, or is it just purely abstract art? So that, plus I think there's a few other things that we can say about a loose painting style. The use of color. Again, in the photorealism, realism sort of area, you really, as the artist, you're limited in the colors that you can use because you're trying to represent the real world as it actually is. So there isn't really much room for creativity or imagination. You just use naturalistic colors. When you start doing the loose painting style, you kind of don't have that restriction anymore. You can still use representational colors if you want, but you're also free to use slightly different colors, more intense colors perhaps, or less intense. You just have a bit more freedom. It's one advantage of loose painting style, I think. And it's also, it's not just colors, it's also things like values and perspective. There are more choices. So anyway, that's my thoughts about a loose painting style. It is, if you think of it as like communication, it is more of a two-way street, a two-way conversation, rather than just the artist talking at the viewer and giving them everything, just spoon-feeding them. I'm not a big fan of photorealism or hyperrealism. I don't really get the point of it. I mean, I've read books and things about it and I understand the things. To me, it doesn't work for me. I prefer a sort of semi-abstract, looser style of painting. I like, as the viewer of the painting, to have a bit of input into the painting, something where I can use a bit of imagination and creativity, and it's not just being spoon-fed everything. General advice, if you want to paint in a loose style, I would say focus on the big shapes. We're talking about landscapes here. Focus on the big shapes and don't get caught up in all the little details. Don't use the smallest brush that you have. That's just going to encourage you to make small details. Use a larger brush on a smaller piece of paper. You can still be careful. You don't have to fling the paint around all over the place. But focus on the big shapes. And don't be afraid to experiment with things like color. It doesn't always have to be representational. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully see you again in 2 weeks' time.